What's up everyone, welcome back to my channel for another true crime video. In our last true crime video, I spoke about a man that allegedly sold parts of his victim's body to a traditional healer. I mentioned in that video that people living with albinism are at a particularly high risk for being victims of such a crime, and I asked if you guys wanted a video on that topic. So in doing my research for that video, I found a lot of information, and because of that I've decided that instead of just giving you one video on the topic, I'm going to split it off into a mini series, so it'll probably be around 4 or 5 parts. And because I also don't want you guys to be waiting weeks and weeks for new parts to be uploaded, I'll only start uploading when I've got at least about 2 videos filmed. So that should take about 2 weeks, 3 weeks at the most. So in the next 2-3 weeks, you should be seeing videos around that topic. With that out of the way, let's get on with today's video. Today we will be talking about an alleged serial killer that was a woman. We haven't really spoken about a woman serial killer on this channel before, so I thought that this might be a good change of pace. Daisy de Melker is a pretty infamous name in South Africa, especially in the paranormal community. I will touch on that aspect a little bit later in this video. Because of all of the history involved in this case, it was very research intensive, so I do want to give a massive shout out and a huge thank you to Nicole Engelbrecht from the True Crime South Africa podcast. I will have all of her information linked below. Nicole made a really good podcast and video about Daisy de Melker, and all of her other videos are also equally as amazing. So please go ahead and check out her channel, check out her podcast. And just as with all my other videos, whether they be decades old or not, I still want to give my usual disclaimer that by making this video, I mean absolutely no disrespect to any of the families or victims affected by this case. This video is purely for educational purposes and to give the audience more information about this case. Daisy Louisa Hancorn Smith was born on the 1st of July 1886 to parents William Stringfellow Hancorn Smith and Fanny Augusta Matilda Hancorn Smith in Seven Fountains, Grahamstown. Today, Grahamstown is known as Makhanda and lies right in the heart of the Eastern Cape Province. It is home to St. Andrew's College, one of South Africa's most prestigious and expensive all-boys private schools, Rhodes University, named after Cecil John Rhodes, a British imperialist who served as Prime Minister of the Cape Colony from 1890 to 1896, founder of the De Beers diamond firm, which pretty much controlled the global diamond trade until around 2014-2015. But what Cecil Rhodes is arguably most famous for is being the driving force behind the annexation of massive areas of land in southern Africa. His actions displaced many indigenous tribes, fueled so many territorial wars, and so much more. Unfortunately, an in-depth look of South Africa's colonial history is far beyond the scope of this video, so I will leave it there for now. On a more positive note, Makhanda is also the home of the annual National Arts Festival. This is an incredible and beautiful celebration of cultures and histories in South Africa and their contribution to the art landscape. The festival takes place around June or July every single year, and it is the largest art festival on the African continent, and it is one of the largest performing arts festivals in the world. It has been running for 45 years. The first National Arts Festival was held on the 13th of July, 1973. Going back to Daisy's life, like I said, her father was William Stringfellow Hancorn Smith. He was actually a first-generation settler in his family, being the 5th of 10 children born to John Hancorn Smith and Mary Ann Stringfellow on the 21st of May, 1842. Both of his parents were from England, but they met and married in South Africa on the 8th of November, 1832. Daisy's mother, on the other hand, was born Fanny Augusta Matilda Bird on the island of Ascension in 1853. She was the only child of her parents, Thomas and Elizabeth Bird. Sometime during her childhood, her family left the island and moved to the British-ruled Cape Colony. Daisy was born the 6th of 9 children on her father's side and the 6th of 11 children on her mother's side. The family lived on a farm with no running hot water and no electricity. But since this was the 1800s, it was pretty common. This didn't mean that they were particularly poor or anything like that. The houses that did usually have electricity or hot running water inside the house were houses of the incredibly wealthy, so the opulent neighborhoods had these amenities inside the house. Obviously, being from such a big family and essentially being the middle child, she was often overlooked by her parents. She wasn't a particularly bad kid or a good kid, and she was just average, with many of her peers stating that she was a generally kind person, which would later explain her choice in profession as a nurse. But because she wasn't particularly exceptional, her parents didn't really pay much mind to her. They didn't give her any additional extra attention. Just to give you a quick recap so that the next bit of information is not too confusing for you, and also the later information will make sense. In 1652, South Africa was colonized by the Dutch through the Dutch East India Trading Company. Disclaimer, I am giving you a very, very watered down version of events of South Africa's colonial history. So I'm just giving you the 2 bits of information that will be important so that you understand the later information. So yes, 1652, South Africa is colonized by the Dutch through the Dutch East India Trading Company. This colonization took place in the Cape, but by the late 1800s, the Dutch colony was under British rule, and Daisy and her family were English. The Dutch colony had moved up to the Transvaal area as well as to what was called the Orange Free State. So those were now the areas under the Dutch rule, and those were the Afrikaans speaking areas, whereas the areas in the Cape, the coastal areas, were the English-speaking areas. In 1894, her father and 2 of her oldest brothers moved to Bulawayo in Rhodesia, which today is known as Zimbabwe, in order to pursue farming. Someone in Rhodesia had promised her father a piece of land for free or a very good price, so they wanted to take up this opportunity. And as they were moving north, it was the gold rush at this time, so the northern parts of southern Africa were really developing. In 1896, her mother sent 10-year-old Daisy to live with her father in Rhodesia. This near 2,000 kilometer trip from Grahamstown to Bulawayo was made either by train over the course of 7 days, and the train would have had to make several stops along the way to pick up additional passengers, to pick up more animals, to drop off people, because at this point in time, the rail system was still in its infancy, so there weren't a lot of routes, so obviously a lot more stops would have had to be made in multiple locations. However, the more likely scenario is that Daisy took this trip by ox wagon, and this trip, instead of taking the 7 days of the train trip, would have taken a couple of weeks to complete. This is the more likely option because it was cheaper than the train. For this trip, Daisy would have had to pack her own food for the duration of this trip, as well as all the other essentials that she would have needed during this time. Today, the same trip would take about a day to a day and a half by car, or a little bit over 5 hours by plane. The men in her family needed a woman to help with the household maintenance, to do the household duties and household chores like cooking and cleaning and everything that the men apparently couldn't do for themselves. And the second reason that she had to go to live with her father in Rhodesia is because at this time there was a war brewing in South Africa. In the year 1900, Daisy came back to South Africa and became a boarder at the Good Hope Seminary School in Cape Town. This was a pretty prestigious and elite school, and also relatively quite expensive. And it was also one of the first schools to be built in South Africa in 1873. Seminary schools are actually educational institutions that provide education in scripture and theology in order to prepare students for ordination to serve the Christian church. They are a specific type of school for people that intend on pursuing some form of ministry-related profession. It was a pretty big deal for middle child Daisy to get a formal education, especially being a girl child. It was very rare for women specifically to be educated past the point of reading and writing. In 1903, 17-year-old Daisy went back to Rhodesia and met a man by the name of Bert Fuller. Fuller worked as a civil servant in the Native Affairs Department at Broken Hill in Rhodesia. Fuller and Daisy apparently fell madly in love with each other, and he was a really good catch for Daisy. He had a well-paying job that promised a really good pension in later years. He lived in a house with servants, and he even had a car, which at that time was a pretty big deal. Although Fuller and Daisy were madly in love, Daisy did find life on the farm not only unexciting but also incredibly difficult. And Daisy also wanted to further her education and to become a nurse. Daisy and Fuller had a conversation about this, and he decided that he would wait for Daisy while she went back to South Africa to complete her nursing qualification. So Daisy went back to South Africa and she enrolled at the Berea Nursing Home in Durban. After 3 years, she went back to Rhodesia, and at this point she was almost completely finished with nursing school. She reunited with Fuller and the pair were engaged to be married in October of 1907. The fairy tale love story was not to be, however, as before they could get married, Fuller contracted black water fever and died, with loving Daisy at his bedside. The official name for black water fever is malarial hemoglobinuria, and the reason that it is termed black water fever is because it discolors your urine to be a dark red or black hue. Although it is incredibly rare, it is one of the most dangerous complications of malaria. It is common in people that have been chronically exposed to malaria some 4 or 5 times, especially in regions that are endemic. Some parts of Zimbabwe are high-risk malaria areas. Because they were engaged, Fuller had a will leaving £100 to his fiancée. That £100 would be more than 100,000 rand today. After Fuller's death, she moved back to South Africa, and instead of going to Grahamstown, this time she settled in Johannesburg. At this time, Johannesburg was part of one of the 2 Boer republics, specifically the Transvaal Boer Republic, and as such, it was under Dutch colonial rule. While in Johannesburg, she met a plumber by the name of William Alfred Cowell, and a year and a half after the death of Fuller, Daisy and William Cowell were wed in March of 1909. At the time, Daisy was 23 and Cowell was 36 years old. After they got married, they lived together in a house in Turffontein. Together, they had 5 children. Back then, you had to have a lot of children because 1 in 5 children would die before the age of 3. For Daisy, it was the opposite. Only 1 of her 5 children survived past the age of 5. She first gave birth to a set of twins in 1910, and one of the twins died just a day after they were born, and the other died just a few weeks later. Her next pregnancy resulted in the birth of her son, Rhodes Cecil Cowell, on the 11th of June 1911. He was a very healthy child and was also known as her favorite child. Unsurprisingly, he was the only child to survive. Her 4th child, another son named Lester Beresford Cowell, was born on the 9th of June 1913. He died at the age of 4 on the 19th of October 1917 due to an abscess on his liver. This cause of death was, of course, according to Daisy. Her 5th and final child with Cowell was yet another son, and he was named Alfred Eric Cowell. Alfred was born a very healthy child on the 19th of October 1915. When he was 15 months old, however, he suffered a seizure, and less than an hour after Daisy took him to bed, he died as a result of the seizure. Due to all of this tragedy, the Cowells didn't have any more children, and they just had Rhodes as their one and only child, their pride and their devotion. As a result, Rhodes grew up a very spoiled child. After all the death and tragedy in Turffontein, the family moved to a house in Germiston. Cowell continued on working as a plumber, and Daisy was the dutiful wife and doting mother to her 2 boys. Like I said, Cowell was a plumber, and with plumbing being such a labor-intensive job, he often suffered with a lot of muscle pain and body aches. Trained nurse Daisy would often use Epsom salt to treat these aches and pains. Epsom salt is a popular home remedy for treating arthritis pain and swelling and other joint and muscle pain. On the 11th of January 1923, Daisy prepared William Cowell his usual Epsom salt drink. Not long after taking the drink, he complained to her that it had made him feel even worse. Since her own remedies weren't working, Daisy decided to call a doctor to examine her husband. When the doctor arrived, he did not find William Cowell's condition to be serious, so he just prescribed him a bromide mixture. Not long after the doctor left, however, Cowell's condition rapidly deteriorated and concerned Daisy sought out the help of her neighbors. She also decided to call another doctor for a second opinion on her husband's condition. When the doctor arrived, Cowell was in really bad shape. He was foaming at the mouth, convulsing, turning blue in the face, and he would cry out in agony if anyone tried to touch him. Cowell ended up dying before he could be examined by the doctor. Due to these symptoms and their rapid progression, the doctor suspected strychnine poisoning and refused to sign off on a death certificate until a proper autopsy was performed. Back then, strychnine was used at low doses for a variety of medical purposes and was even formulated into a pill form. Today, it is used mainly in rodent poison. A post-mortem was performed by the acting district surgeon, and he determined the cause of death to be chronic nephritis and cerebral hemorrhage. In layman's terms, that would be chronic inflammation of the kidneys and basically bleeding of the brain. Cowell had a £1,795 life insurance policy that named Daisy as the sole beneficiary. If the equivalent of £100 is 100,000 Rand today, you can only imagine how much richer £1,795 would make Daisy. Even though she was incredibly wealthy after the passing of her husband, Daisy went back to work as a nurse at the Transvaal Children's Memorial Hospital in Johannesburg, specifically in Braamfontein. At this time, Rhodes was entering his teen years and had suddenly become sickly, even allegedly developing epilepsy. Daisy felt that the reason her son was getting so sick all of a sudden was because of his school, and she even blamed his teachers for his poor academic performance as well as his failing health. As a result, Daisy sent him away to a private school, a very expensive private school, but his academic performance did not improve, and after about a year at the school, he was sent back home because he had failed every single exam. Still wanting her son to make something of his life, Daisy enrolled him at a trade school so he could learn to be a plumber, just like his father. During this time, Daisy and Rhodes still lived in the Germiston home where Cowell had died. Sometime in 1925, Daisy met another plumber by the name of Robert Sproat. He was 10 years her senior. After a short courtship of a few months, Daisy and Sproat were married on the 11th of January 1926, the anniversary of her first husband's death. Unfortunately, Rhodes and Sproat did not get on well. They had a pretty tumultuous relationship. They were frequently fighting with one another, and it just created a hostile environment in the home. This was most likely due to the fact that Rhodes was now a teenager, and after being waited on hand and foot by his mother, he would feel less than excited to have to share his mother's affections with another man. One morning in October 1927, Daisy lovingly prepared her husband a beer. Not long after he drank the beer, Sproat became violently ill. He had severe muscle spasms, he was vomiting and was writhing in agony and pain. Daisy had a doctor called, and the doctor diagnosed him with indigestion. A few days later, Sproat collapsed, and once again, the doctor was called. This time, the doctor said Sproat was suffering from high blood pressure, and his job as a plumber meant that he was being exposed to lead, which was exacerbating his condition and causing his teeth to go bad and to fall out. The doctor gave him some mouthwash so he could swish around in his mouth, and Sproat went to bed, instantly passing out. The following day, his condition got even worse, and Sproat was screaming in pain for most of the morning. A different doctor was called, and he gave Sproat an injection to help with his symptoms. This did not do much of anything. Fearing that he was at death's door basically, Daisy telephoned Sproat's brother, William Sproat, and told him that Robert was on his deathbed. Robert and William were very close, so William rushed to see his brother before the worst happened. When William arrived, Daisy informed him that she was concerned about her husband's estate as he had not updated his will since they had been married almost 2 years prior. She managed to convince William to talk Robert into changing his will so that everything would be left to Daisy. William loved his brother very much, and he was concerned that his sister-in-law would be left destitute if Robert did indeed die. William helped Robert write up a new will, and after some time, Robert started to feel better. Only a few weeks later, however, Sprout fell ill once again, exhibiting the same symptoms as before, but this time to a much greater intensity. One day, Rhodes walked in on his stepfather on the couch in the family room, and he was writhing in pain. He called for his mother, who immediately called a doctor to the house. A doctor arrived, as well as a neighbor, and the doctor informed Daisy that her husband was suffering a stroke. He also told her that it would not be long before he passed. The neighbor helped Daisy change her husband into his pajamas, and they took him to bed. By this time, he had to be tied down to his bed because his convulsions were so severe. Sprout did not recover from the second round of the mysterious illness, and on the 6th of November 1927, he passed away. An autopsy was not performed, and the doctor who had attended him listed his cause of death as complications due to the stroke. Daisy received over £4,000 from his life insurance policy and an additional £560 from his pension fund. Sprout was buried next to Daisy's first husband in Brixton Cemetery. 42-year-old Daisy was now twice widowed and twice the beneficiary of hefty life insurance policies. With some of the money she received from Sprout's estate, she went on a 3-month vacation to England with Rhodes. Rhodes had failed his plumbing apprenticeship and had been unable to secure a job at this point, so he was unemployed and he could pretty much do anything for 3 months because he had no responsibilities. He didn't have a job to go back to. His unemployed status wasn't something that he worried about because his mother took care of him. His mother had made him accustomed to this lavish lifestyle, so it was a lifestyle that he expected at this point. Daisy loved living a good life, and Rhodes loved being given a good life to live, and that's exactly what they did when they got back from England. It wasn't long before her money started running out, however, and by 1930 it was almost all gone. Luckily for Daisy, plumbing was a very popular profession back then, and she managed to meet yet another plumber. Sidney Clarence de Melker was born in 1884, so he was only 2 years older than her this time. He was absolutely captivated by her, and they were married on the 21st of January 1931, and she took on the name that she would later brand with infamy. Sidney himself was a widower and had a daughter named Eileen, who was similar in age to Rhodes from his first marriage. Eileen and Rhodes didn't get on very well. Eileen did not like Rhodes at all. She thought him to be lazy and even remarked that he was often unwilling to get up for work in the morning. An interesting fact about Sidney is that he played for the Springboks in their first tour as a halfback from 1903 to 1906. Sidney and Daisy had a seemingly happy marriage, and Sidney absolutely adored Daisy. He was in love with Daisy. By this time, Rhodes was 20 and he had managed to secure a job, surprisingly enough. According to some sources, he was to inherit a £100 inheritance from his father's estate upon his 21st birthday. He bragged about this to anyone who would listen and would often pester Daisy to do more for him and give him more money, just give him more than she was already giving him. In 1932, his 21st birthday was fast approaching, and this made Rhodes even more demanding of his mother. On the 2nd of March 1932, Rhodes set off for work with a few sandwiches and a flask of hot coffee that his mother had lovingly prepared for him. During his lunch break, Rhodes decided to share his food and coffee with a co-worker, and not long after this shared meal, the pair became violently ill. They did end up throwing up, and although they did not fully recover, they were well enough to carry on working. And Rhodes happily sipped on his coffee for the remainder of the day. His co-worker did end up making a full recovery, but upon returning home, Rhodes's condition continued to deteriorate. Daisy was beside herself with panic when her son began convulsing, and she feared that his epilepsy had made a return. She called a doctor, and the doctor diagnosed Rhodes with cerebral malaria, and he hypothesized that the cerebral malaria had laid dormant all these years and was only now having an effect on Rhodes. He would live in excruciating pain for the next 3 days before finally passing on the 5th of March 1932. The doctor returned and listed his cause of death as cerebral malaria. Daisy had gotten away with the murder of her own son. Luckily for Rhodes, however, the stepfather that he had loathed so much had a suspicious brother who had been keeping tabs on Daisy since the death of Robert Sproat. After the death of his brother, William vowed to follow Daisy's life events, and when he heard of Rhodes's death under similar and suspicious circumstances as that of his brother's, he immediately contacted authorities and he informed them that he had suspected that Daisy had not only poisoned her son, but her first two husbands as well. On the 15th of April 1932, the police obtained a court order to exhume the bodies of Rhodes Cowell, Robert Sproat, and William Cowell. Despite being buried for over a month at this point, Rhodes's body was in extremely good condition. His body was pretty well preserved. This is something that arsenic typically does to the body, as that it prevents it from decomposing. The government analyst assigned to the case was able to isolate traces of arsenic in the organs, vertebra, and hair. Trace amounts of strychnine were also found in the remains of Daisy's first two husbands, William Cowell and Robert Sproat, specifically in their vertebra. A week after the exhumations, the police arrested Daisy and charged her with the murder of all three men. The arrest of Daisy de Melker was headline news, and upon hearing of her arrest, a chemist from Spilkins Extension Pharmacy in Kensington came forward and reported that a month prior to Rhodes's death, Daisy had come to his pharmacy requesting arsenic so she could put her sick cat to sleep. She had signed the poison control register as Mrs. D. L. Sproat. Rhodes's co-worker also went to police and told them about the flask that they had drank from on the day that Rhodes fell ill. He was tested for arsenic poisoning, and trace amounts of arsenic were found in his hair and fingernails. Police went to Daisy's house to search for evidence, and there they found the flask. It was collected and tested, and the results came back positive for arsenic. Daisy's trial was huge in the media. I will link a few articles about the sensationalism of the reporting that her trial received, but I think Nicole put it perfectly when she said that it could be likened to the 2014 Oscar Pistorius trial. It was really that big. People were selling seats in the courthouse for up to 30 shillings each. Everybody wanted to be a part of this trial in some way. Another reason that this trial was such a huge media frenzy was because Daisy was an English-speaking woman from an English family living in a Dutch-ruled region. So already the public had a very negative view of her simply because of the fact that she was English. I have mentioned before about how in South Africa our court systems don't have juries. Your conviction and sentencing is dependent solely on the verdict of a judge. At that time, however, it was normal for anyone accused of murder to be tried by a judge and a jury. Just like in a lot of other places today, you could opt out of a trial by jury and instead be tried by a judge and two assessors. Like I said, Daisy's trial was a spectacle, and on the advice of her legal counsel, she decided to opt out of a trial by jury. This was a smart move on her part because, like I said, the public absolutely hated her. They hated that she had possibly killed her own son. They hated that she had possibly killed two of her husbands for material gain, and most of all, they hated her because she was English. On the 17th of October 1932, Daisy's trial began, and the presiding judge was Mr. Justice Greenberg, and the two assessors were two senior magistrates, Mr. J.M. Graham and Mr. A.A. Stanford. Daisy faced three charges, and I'll just quickly read them out to you. Firstly, that on or about 11 January 1923 at or near Bertram's in the district of Johannesburg, she had murdered her husband, William Alfred Cowell, by poisoning him with strychnine. Secondly, that on or about 6 November 1927 in the same district, she had murdered her second husband, Robert Sproat, by poisoning him with strychnine. And thirdly, that on or about the 5th of March 1932 in the district of Germiston, she had murdered her son, Rhodes Cecil Cowell, by administering poison, namely arsenic. Her trial lasted about 30 days. 60 witnesses were called for the Crown, and less than half of that were called for the defense. The forensic evidence was presented by Dr. J.M. Watt, an expert toxicologist, and professor of pharmacology at the University of the Witwatersrand. Before giving his verdict, the judge stated that the Crown had presented insufficient evidence that could conclusively prove that Cowell and Sprouts had died of strychnine poisoning, and as a result, she was acquitted of these two charges. On the 25th of November 1932, Daisy Louisa de Melker was found guilty of the murder of her son, Rhodes Cecil Cowell, and sentenced to death by hanging. Her sentence was carried out on the 30th of December 1932 at the Pretoria Central Prison. She was the second woman to be hanged in the district now known as South Africa and was buried in a pauper's grave. Sydney never believed that Daisy was guilty. He stood by her side throughout the whole trial. He stood by her side until basically her dying day. He truly believed in her innocence and he truly believed in their love. Before I get into the last bit, which is that little bit about Daisy's paranormal activity, I do want to mention that due to the media attention that the trial garnered, Daisy considered herself a celebrity. She would show up, although she didn't like show up to trial the way a celebrity would, as in full glam and things like that. She showed up to her trial not wearing makeup, wearing like scruffy clothes, whatever. But she would offer the media photographs and she would offer them her autograph even. Another callous thing about Daisy during the trial is that on the last day of the trial, she was so convinced of her innocence. She was so convinced that she would be found innocent of her crimes. She walked into the courtroom with a manuscript under her arm, a manuscript of a play about her life, a manuscript of a play about the murders and about how she had poisoned two of her husbands, how she had poisoned her son. And she was expecting to be found innocent, to be acquitted, and not only acquitted, but then she was expecting that she would be able to sell off this manuscript for riches beyond her wildest dreams. She really thought that she was gonna live this lavish lifestyle after this and basically live happily ever after. She was truly delusional. That's what she was. She was truly delusional. Since her death, there have been apparent sightings of Daisy's restless spirit in almost every single location that she lived in, worked at, or otherwise occupied. During her trial, she was remanded at the now Johannesburg Women's Prison in Hillbrow. This is now a National Heritage Site where the likes of Winnie Madikizela Mandela was held during the apartheid era, during her fights for the freedom of South Africa. She was held there, so it's been converted to a National Heritage Site. So it's basically a museum. You can tour there, you can... I think they even do ghost tours there. I'm not sure on that, but I think they do ghost tours specifically around Daisy's cell. You can even go to Daisy's cell herself, and if you're lucky, you might just see her ghost. The house that she lived in with William Cowell in Germiston is also apparently haunted. Her ghost can allegedly be seen from a window glaring at anyone that walks by. But the one place that seemingly has the most activity from Daisy's spirit is none other than Ward 7 of the Transvaal Children's Memorial Hospital in Braamfontein, which is now known as the Florence Transition Home. I personally don't believe that her ghost exists. I personally don't believe in ghosts, but I was considering like doing sort of like a vlog of all the places that Daisy had lived in. So if you guys are interested in seeing a video like that, then let me know, and then maybe I will go to the museum and I'll go to all the other places that she occupied in her life, because they're not that far from where I live, so I could make a day trip out of that. And with all of that said, it does bring us to the end of this case and of course to the end of this video. If you did find this video interesting, please do give it a thumbs up so that I know to give you guys more content like this on my channel. If you enjoy this type of content and you're interested in true crime, go ahead and subscribe to my channel so that you see more content like this. Click that notification bell so that you get notified every single time I upload a new video. Let me know what other cases you want me to cover. Also, let me know what types of videos you want to see on Saturdays. I upload on Saturdays now. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Please look after yourselves out there. Please stay safe. Please stay inside if you can stay inside. And I will see you in my next video. Bye.